Alright, today we're going to take a look at section 4.9, graphing and solving quadratic inequalities. So a couple things to remember just when we're graphing inequalities, because we did this last chapter, but we only worked with lines. Now they're going to be parabolas. A couple things. When you have a less than or greater than, the parabola will be dashed. But if you have a less than or equal to or a greater than or equal to, then your parabola will be solid. Again, we're going to need to use a test point to shade. The nice part about these ones, though, is I'm going to show you guys how to do these on your calculator completely. So if we take a look at our first one, I have y is greater than x squared plus 3x minus 4. So if I move over to my calculator, I'm going to go ahead and plug that right in. So I have x squared plus 3x minus 4. Now if I go to my graph, if your graph isn't set up right, you can go ahead and hit zoom 6. That'll take you back to that standard window. So if we take a look at our graph, the biggest thing here is first we need to copy this graph over, but the next thing we need to do is write our answer in interval notation. So when we were writing in interval notation before, we had those and and or statements. If you have shading inside the parabola, like we have here, this is going to be an and statement. If you have shading on the outside, that's going to be an or statement. So in order to move this graph over to yours, the first thing we're going to do is find the actual vertex. So if you go to second, calculate, and this is a minimum, so you're going to go 3. Remember, you have to pick on each side. So we have to scroll down here. Sorry, it's a little bit slower. Oops. Might get an error here. If you look, remember it's got to be between these two. So I'm going to try this again real quick. So second, calculate. So I want to start on the left side. If you look, it says left bound, so you want to be to the left of the vertex. And then for your right bound, you want to be to the right of the vertex. Remember, you can use this indicator here on top with those arrows being in the middle. Your vertex should fall in the middle there. So it says that our vertex here is at negative 1.5 and then negative 6.25. So if I move over to my graph, I'm going to go over 1.5 and down 6.25. Again, if I don't have my calculator, I can do all of this by hand. However, it's a lot more work when we've already tested you on this and you can do everything on your calculator now. Now, the other thing that we need here is we need to find the actual zeros. So if you go back to that second calculate button, we can find the zeros. So if you go and hit 2, the biggest thing here is if this says left bound, like you see here, we need to scroll up so that we are above our 0 here. Hit enter, and then the right bound is going to be below that 0. Hit enter again, and now it's looking for a guess. Once we hit enter, it'll give you that final guess. So your first 0 is going to be at negative 40. Then we can calculate the other one. So I go to second, calculate. Again, we have to scroll over here. So on this side here, your left bound will be below. Your right bound needs to go above. And our other 0 is at 1, 0. Now, the reason we need to find the zeros, that's what we're going to use to write our answer in interval notation. So if you go ahead and take a look, we have a greater than symbol. So my parabola is going to be dotted. I'm going to do the best I can here. And then all of your shading should take place between here. So when we write this in interval notation, you're going to use those zeros. So I have -4, 1. So all of your values between -4 and 1 will work, or they are solutions to this parabola. Now if you take a look, I put the parentheses around here because my parabola, the line is dotted, which means that that -4 and the 1 aren't included. So if I put those back in, they wouldn't make a true statement. So again, you can pull all of your information right from the graph, and our answer is written in interval notation. So this is covering the shading between these points. All right, next one. First thing I need you guys to do is I need you to change this inequality to just be greater than or equal to. So remember, when we are filling this in to our calculator, we need to be back in that y equals. So the first thing I need to do is I need to add 3 to both sides. So now I have x squared minus 4x plus 3 is greater than or equal to 0. Again, change this to the greater than or equal to. That was a mistake on my copying. So if you look though, when we go back to the calculator here, the y equals is on the left side. So I need to rewrite this so that my y equals would be on the left side, because the 0 just gets replaced with the y. So when I rewrite, I'm going to have y is less than or equal to x squared minus 4x plus 3. This is what you are going to type into your calculator. So y is less than or equal to change this to minus 4x plus 3. Now if I go to my graph, this is going to be one of those or statements, because if you take a look, all of our shading is going to be on the outside. So first thing I need to do is I'm going to calculate my minimum. If I go to second, calculate minimum. Again, you want to be on the left side of it, and then move the cursor over to the right side. So here, my minimum is at 2, -1. So that'll be my point there. That's that vertex. The next thing I need to do is calculate the zeros. So if I go back to second, calculate 0. Again, if you are taking the 0 on the left side first, the left bound needs to be above it. And you're going to move below it. And this should be at 1, 0. Then we need to calculate the second one here. So now on this side, the left will be below. The right bound will be above. Again, use these arrows on top to tell you if they're facing each other, then we set our bounds up correctly. Then my next one is going to be at 3, 0. Now I have the greater than or equal to, so this is going to be a solid line, and all of our shading happens around the outside. Again, it should look similar to this. Now, to write our answer in interval notation here, if we're looking at all of the shading happens from -infinity up until 1. Then from 3, oops, this should be a bracket because the 1 is included. Then from 3 to infinity. So this is writing your answer in that interval notation. And again, you should have the brackets here because we have a solid line, so these points are included on that graph. All right, go ahead and flip to the back side. Our next one here, we are going to graph the system of inequalities. So all we're going to do is plug these right into your calculator again, and it's already in the y equals. So I'm going to go ahead and go greater than or equal to, oops, sorry, go back to your y equals screen. And plug this information in. Clear that out. So 2x squared. And then move down. So these should both be graphed on the same plane. My next one is going to be less than negative x squared plus 1. Now if you go to your graph, now we want to see where they overlap, so where that section overlap is. So if I go to my alpha shade, so alpha y equals, remember if you hit 1, it'll eliminate and only show that little bit of overlap. So if we take a look here, this is still kind of tough to see, but the shading actually happens in this little section here. So I'm going to adjust my window a little bit and just go from -5 to 5. Same thing here. -5 to 5. Now if I go back to my graph, the shading happens right here in this little section. So again, you're going to have to copy this over. So my first one, my first graph is that solid graph. So y is greater than or equal to 2x squared. So my vertex is at 0, 0. Then what I can do is I can go to the table and look at different values. So if I take a look here, if I go, just move up 1 to each side. So this y1 will be for the y is greater than or equal to 2x squared, and the y2 is for your values for the other graph, the negative x squared plus 1. So if I take a look at 1 over 1 up to, and on the other side, -1 up to, this is going to be solid. Then if I look back at my graph, my other vertex is going to be at 1, 0 from here. Then if I go back to the table and pick a point on each side, so -1, 0, and 1, 0, this one's going to be dotted. And our shading should happen in the middle here. So this is what your answer will look like for this question. You're just graphing both parabolas, and then you're finding the section where they intersect. All right, so go ahead and pause here and try this last one on your own. Again, I'm just going to plug these back into my calculator. Double check here, -x squared plus 4x minus 4, 2x squared plus x minus 8. So it looks like my calculator is freezing up here, so let's give it a second. So again, if we go to the alpha y equals, we can get rid of the extra shading. And my calculator is moving quite slowly. Yours is probably quicker at this point. So this should be your answer for that second graph. In order for you to receive homework points tomorrow, this needs to be filled in. All right, see you guys tomorrow.